Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Robin Hanson here, and he developed the theory of Futarchy. Welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm not sure I'm going to be crazy yet. We'll find out. You might call me crazy. I'm not going to embrace the crazy label that easily.
Because I was doing some research, and apparently you were talking about conditional betting markets in 2001, 2002, including developing Futarchy.
Yes.
Which is all about how to basically bring the future into the present by doing conditional bettings. So that sounds at least the appearance of crazy in 2001 or 2002, right?
Well, it's a proposal for change. Now, if you think all proposals for change are crazy, then sure. But, there should be a process of innovation whereby we think of ideas and then we try them out and some of them work and then we adopt those. And that's the spirit in which I made my proposal. And of course, I think it makes sense. But all innovation is the combination of simple, elegant ideas that make sense and messy details that have to make them work. And many simple, elegant ideas, you just can't find the messy details to make them work. And then you have to abandon them, at least for a while. So that's why I'm excited that there are now experiments with my elegant idea. And a number of organizations are trying it out. And so far, having apparent success, but I want to see a lot more trials.
Okay, so those are the messy details. The organizations are actually implementing them now 20 years later.
25.
25 years later. Can you talk more about like the messy details?
Well, actually, one organization's implemented in 1981 to 84. I was a physics and philosophy grad student long ago. I didn't know about that. And when I reinvented the idea, I had never heard of it. And apparently not many people did hear about this experiment, but somebody ran a company using Futarchy and they decided who to hire and which features to add to the software product that they were selling. And they made a lot of money. And the person who ran this company using Futarchy then has since been a rich investor who invests in many other things using the money he made from his company.
Brilliant. Can you share the name of that company?
Well, his name is Jeffrey Wernick, and I have a blog post about him and his, efforts then. And I've done recorded an interview with him as well.
Cool. Okay, so that is fascinating. So that was back in the 80s. Now we're in the much more implementation details. Yeah.
Like 3 years ago or so, an India-based government agency started using it. But that government agency is very shy about publicity, so they don't want anybody to say anything about them. Then 2 years ago, the MetaDAO, a crypto organization, started using Futarchy, and since then they've had 13 client organizations, and a couple of other startups are trying to enter the space of supplying Futarchy governance.
Okay, so and that's a DAO, so that's like one step into the world of sort of governance. It's not necessarily a state or a sovereign.
Right, for-profit organizations are governed, as are churches and clubs, etc. And this is governed according to the metric of increasing the value of its key coin, and that's common for crypto organizations. So Futarchy requires that you agree on some outcome metric that you can measure. That's the thing you're trying to achieve. Then you create an asset that pays in proportion to that outcome metric, and then you trade that asset conditionally on project proposals passing or failing. And the difference of those prices is what you use to govern. That's the key quick summary of the concept. And I could go through an example if you'd like, but...
So I have a lot of questions that go into that because I've been on a deep dive into the history of money, the history of business. I want to write a book about the history of questions within business. What do questions do for business? And this is like a conditional market is a set of it's questions and answers.
Right.
But the asset, and so I've been doing a deep dive on money, and I've started to realize that a lot of debt, a lot of all of these instruments that have organically arisen from maybe Western culture, maybe some from other cultures as well. They're all organically created in order to think about the future in this organic way that somehow leads to our crazy political economic system that is just so complex, but it's all individuals along with like sovereigns in there and churches and clubs and what you mentioned. And they're all doing business, doing all these different things. and somehow it's like looking forward into the future, and that's why they call them futures. I guess that's a good question. What is the difference between what do we currently have? How does the current economic system not enable the type of bets that you're looking for to make?
So think about a company which has a stock price, and the investors roughly agree that they want the stock price to go up. That's what they want the governance of the stock to do. And then speculators are looking at the situation of the company and what it does, and they are adjusting the stock price up or down, which means that whenever the company does something the investors expect will help, the price goes up. When they do something they expect the price to go down, that will hurt, the price goes down. So speculators are giving an after the fact judgment on each choice the firm makes, and of course everything that changes in its environment, whether that's good or bad. So the stock price is just a continual record of the judgments of the speculators about the current best estimate of the company given all the things that have happened. And that includes choices the company makes. It includes, ways the economy changes, competitors showing up, everything. Okay, so in some sense, a company executive could make a decision, see if the stock approves, and then if the stock doesn't approve, undo it. And they could get feedback about choices that way. Now that'll look a little awkward because, now the speculators expecting it might be reversed will maybe not give as clear a signal. But that is the market advising. Now, the executives of a company have some substantial stake more than the average speculator. And there's a kind of organization we call private equity where the executives have a very large stake. So large that we don't actually have a public market for the asset.
Wow.
And for those companies, the executive, when they make a decision, their net wealth goes up or down in the long run based on whether they make a good decision. But they're not facing the immediate feedback of the speculators. And in some sense, they can defy speculators more easily. So most people who run public companies, their payoff is, say, based on stock options. And that means if they make a decision that speculators disapprove of, their pay goes down in the short run. Now, if they're actually right in the long run and they could hold, stock for the long run, they would be paid off. But most of them don't actually hang in for the long run.
Yeah.
So in public companies, the CEOs and the executives are more tied to the speculators' expectations. And so they need to pander to those expectations, basically. Whereas with private equity, they more take their own judgment and then wait years to find out if their judgment's correct. And that means private equity does make better decisions. Now,
brilliant.
Now, Futarchy related to this is a way that the speculators can more directly advise the decision before it's made.
Speculators can advise a decision before it's made.
Right. So right. So the company's thinking of doing a new plant or something.
Yeah.
They can ask the speculators, if we make the plant, what's our company worth? If we don't make the plant, what's our company worth? And now they can get advice before they decide on the plant.
Okay.
Which is somewhat of an improvement, but that's not that big of an improvement.
Yeah.
But it's somewhat.
Yeah.
But it's better for, say, things where we're suspicious about whether the company makes good decisions. So, for example, when a firm typically asks for more money, like we want to raise more money, if they do that in an environment where their decision just happens, on average, the stock price goes down 2%. Speculators go, you need more money. This sounds like a problem. We don't think as much of you. But if the executives raise money in a context where there's going to need to be an approval by, say, the stock holders will have to vote and approve this raising of money. In that case, when they make the proposal, the price goes up 2%. Because people expect the approval to be a good filter, and it won't be approved unless it's actually good for the investors. So Futarchy can sit in that sort of role and be easier to implement than a shareholder vote. And therefore, when there are decisions the executives might make that might be bad for the company, but good for the executives, Futarchy shines better there because we can just veto the decisions that would be bad for the company.
Interesting. This is, given everything you said, why would a company ever go public? Why,
because private equity requires that the CEO own a big chunk of the firm, and most CEOs just aren't that rich.
Mm.
So this is, so this is a way in which wealth inequality is good for the economy. The more rich people there would be, the more private equity there could be, because the more people there would be who could own, a quarter of a company and manage it. But most of our big companies, we don't have enough rich people to do that. So we have to instead have, managers who are tied to stock incentives.
And that's the interesting thing I've been learning about the history of the corporations. I've been reading this book called For Profit, and For Profit goes into why do we have a corporation, and it has to do with the East India Company and also the Dutch East Indies Company. But the East India Company had to figure out a way where they could incentivize the managers because you had the owners separate from the managers. And that feels like that's exactly what you were just talking about. We haven't left that situation. We're still in that situation just because to do it on yourself requires a huge capital pool, and most people who are entrepreneurs don't have that yet.
Right. So one issue is if you've got a public firm, you have to worry more about whether you trust the managers, and Futarchy could help us oversee the managers better and trust them less, which could be to our benefit. But I think the main benefit of Futarchy is in organizations where it's not for profit.
Yeah.
And you have some other outcome metric. And then in this case, you have more problems with the managers doing things to benefit themselves and telling you they're doing it for this larger purpose that we say we've agreed on. And Futarchy can more hold them to actually making choices that are achieving this purpose that the people have agreed.
But there's an economic element, though. You're talking about people making bets on it with money.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there's the betting market, and that would be the source of the information about whether these choices are good for the organization.
Got it. Okay, got it. And it's so interesting. I was on my walk this morning, and I knew we had this interview coming up, and so I turned on Grok voice mode because I like walking and talking with it. And I came across an interview with Yarvin, or like an exchange that you guys had with Yarvin, because the betting markets
we did a debate together.
A debate, yeah. And so it was so interesting because his whole thing is that, you have the feudal states, and the feudal states have no choice within the feudal state, but the fact that it's an anarchic system allows for the choice by people moving with their feet. So their only vote is by their feet. What you're saying is that's kind of nuts. Let's do this thing where we actually vote on the decisions within a sovereignty. Have any governments? Yeah, you mentioned India. It might be some interest from India. What about how does this I'm so curious. Is this happening right now in terms of governments, either real governments, city governments, state governments? What's the level of messy? Yeah.
In presidential elections, for many decades, we've had markets that give you conditional estimates of the chance of your party winning the election, conditional on who you nominate. So that's direct decision advice to the political parties of who to nominate. And then in the last election, both Metaculus and Manifold had conditional estimates of various other consequences of who wins the presidential election. So that's basically these conditional estimates showing up in politics and the political process. They haven't shown up in government agency decisions yet, but they have shown up now in the political process. They're seeping
into the way that we consider democratic elections. This last election definitely influenced my life. And I've now there's so much talk about the worlds that I spend a lot of time in. It used to be only AI, but now I'm down here in Buenos Aires, and we host our AI Whispers at this local crypto center. And before I started going there, I had a kind of negative opinion of crypto just because it's there's so many scams out there. But now crypto and AI are starting to merge, and that conditional betting is going to, I should turn this into a question. What are your thoughts on these agents using conditional markets, humans, autonomous agents, conditional markets, and the connections between all those? Is that something real?
So most social institutions are designed with the eye that individuals might have differing preferences and information. and they should be robust to a wide range of environmental context and kinds of people who might participate and kinds of motivations. And from that perspective, given that AI is coming, at least sometime in the foreseeable future, we should be designing institutions to be robust to whether they're participants or AIs. We are making relatively human-like AIs, at least in this generation. But even so, you'll want to make sure that your system can be robust to that. So for example, one person, one vote doesn't work quite as well with AIs because you can just make a lot of AIs. But lots of other institutions are robust to whether AIs participate, say markets, supply and demand. AIs can participate there just fine. And Futarchy is designed as an institution which I made sure was robust to AI. I was an AI researcher, you see, when I first came up with this. And so I was an AI researcher from 84 to 93.
So 84 to 93, that was when there was the big wave of expert systems. Yeah.
Expert systems, yes. And, the first wave of neural nets. But I was an AI researcher then. And then it was in 99 when I came up with Futarchy and decision markets. So I had plenty of exposure to AI to understand that eventually we would have AI and you should just design institutions to be robust. So, and then the institution shouldn't actually care who's participating, and it doesn't need to be different for different kinds of participants. It should just be up to the participants to figure out where they can best participate and to manage their participation role. So I don't know that AI is actually up to the task of trading in financial markets well today. Many people have that hope and they're trying it, but I don't need to have an opinion on that.
Why not?
I can just focus on designing institutions that are robust to whether or not AI participates or not, and then let the AI figure out if they can help.
How much are you invested in the idea of proof of human in terms of those institutions? How important is proof of human?
Pretty much all the institutions I've ever designed don't need that.
How not?
Well, I don't care whether people are human in my institutions, so I don't need to.
Got it. Okay, got it. So you're doing an operating system. The institutions are operating systems, and you're designing institutions that basically they obviate the need for understanding whether there's a human being or not.
Even more importantly, I might say, our institutions for humans embody a lot of ancient wisdom that we don't really understand. And when we design institutions for AIs, we shouldn't trust our conscious analysis of them so much. We should just try to have them follow the human institutions because we have some reason to believe they embody a lot of wisdom. So instead of making separate rules for the AIs in terms of law and finance and governance, et cetera, you should just include them in the same standard institutions we all use. And then as we find flaws in those, we should fix them for both. I don't see any particular reason to think that governance institutions should be different for AIs.
Brilliant.
So just include them.
Which countries are thinking most advanced in this way? Who is thinking about because I know I imagine what you just said is not a very well distributed thought because I had never heard it before. It's not something that I was just going to
Well, we have a more fundamental problem. The world up until a few centuries ago was extremely conservative, and it almost never wanted to try anything new anywhere. Now, in the last few centuries, we've become much more open to and celebrating innovation, except in governance institutions. Most people just don't want and don't consider innovation in governance. And we've had changes, but even some obvious changes, people aren't really considering. So, for example, the United States was one of the first democracies. And we chose a structure for democracy that made sense given the best understanding at the time. But over the last 3 centuries, the world has learned, for example, that proportional representation just seems to be a more robust form of democracy. That's what the newer democracies adopted. But here in the US, we're just not at all willing to change. We're not saying, geez, it looks like we should update our democratic system to the thing that works best in the rest of the world. We're just saying, we refuse to consider changes. So there's just a sense, and we have similar issues in law. We have some just ancient social institutions that we're in the habit of thinking just shouldn't change. And partly what's going on is we are just rich and comfortable, and we don't feel we need to take chances with changing basic things. So if our world was more, at risk, felt more threatened, we thought we might be displaced if we didn't manage to improve ourselves, we might be more eager to look for, experiment with changes, adopt them. But when we feel very safe, like the US does, certainly, we just aren't interested in those changes.
So,
for example, look, proportional representation solves the gerrymandering problem, which is now bedeviling the United States in the last few weeks. But that's an ancient problem. We've known about it for a very long time, and we've known that there's a solution. But we're apparently not in the mood to fix it, so we're just going to suffer.
So you said something about suffering and the relationship to collective suffering and being able to think clearly about institutions. What kind of struck out to me there was that I agree with you. We have the most abundance that we've ever had, but the collective consciousness does not feel abundant. Like it feels chaotic. It feels, and like 2020 was this event which was really crazy. And all these things happened. I was planning on apocalypse. Apocalypse did not happen. All the supply chains, despite a brief change, because then you have Pinker who talks about like the supply chains as God, and they handled pretty well through COVID, and they're still handling everybody's getting their stuff and their trinkets all the time. But can you talk more about this sort of like this disconnect? Because although I agree with what you just said, it feels very different from the felt experience as an American. I'm now down here in Argentina, and it's a very different situation down here, which is kind of why I like it. But
so forever, humans organizations have had two conflicting, sets of issues that call to their attention. Often there's outside threats, and those call for unification, suppression of internal differences and conflicts in order to meet an outside challenge. On the other hand, when the outside challenges fade or seem less relevant, we are tempted to focus on internal conflicts and to, put more energy into them, feel stronger about them, take larger risks with respect to them, because we don't feel that a failure to be unified is threatening our outside survival. Scheidel has this book called The Great Leveler. It says that if you think about inequality in history, it's roughly summarized as it rises in times of peace and prosperity and falls in times of wars and famines and pandemics and things like that. And you should therefore hope for rising inequality, because that means you're in good times. And I would say polarization acts similar to inequality. You have rising polarization typically in times of peace and prosperity. And then when you have big conflicts, polarization falls because there is a big threat and people feel more need to unify around the threat. So, for example, up until the beginning of World War I, the United States and Western Europe had seen rising polarization and internal conflict, and they were focused on that. And then when World War I showed up in World War II, there was a great era of declining inequality and declining polarization, where nations and allies unified and came to more think as one and act as one because of these outside threats. But since World War II, we've had peace and prosperity. The Cold War limited that to some extent, but then with the end of the Cold War, we've had even faster rising polarization and inequality because we just feel comfortably at peace.
It's so interesting. It gets to the nature of how consciousness and identity and what we think we are isn't necessarily the whole story. There's layers to us that we don't understand, both at the individual level and the collective level. And I think you're talking about something very real in terms of the collective level, where it's like only when we have space to complain do we start to complain. Otherwise, we're like fixing whatever problem needs to get fixed in that struggle, right? Mm-hmm.
Sure. Like even in a relationship, the people who complain most in the relationships are the ones where they think the relationship's pretty secure.
Interesting, yeah. It's when things go bad, it's like it turns on the nervous system, and then we turn into more programmatic beings. Is that right?
More cooperative, more willing to compromise to keep the unit going.
The unit, interesting. Yeah. Okay, and this gets into AI territory, because one of the things I wanted to talk about when you were talking about the institutions and the proof of human is that I have not seen any evidence that AI can act without my autonomy giving it guidance. I give it a lot of guidance every day. That's most,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it can act
Exactly.
without guidance. It just does it badly.
So it's an extension.
So you are incentivized to manage its interaction because you see it has some capabilities and some lack of capabilities. But over time, that'll change. But this is true for children. It's true for managers and subordinates, right? Whenever we have agents, we try to make some judgment about where they can be trusted more to act on their own and where we need to watch them more. Both because of their raw capabilities and because of their incentives.
Raw capabilities, yeah.
And sometimes, right, I mean, sometimes, like with a child, the reason that we have to oversee them is because they're just not very competent. But with a subordinate and as a boss, it might be that your subordinate is very competent, but they might be competent in screwing you and benefiting themselves, and then you need to watch them for that.
Do you think there's any risk that AI is doing that?
Of course, there will be risk of that.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting. Well,
I mean, but it just get worse as they get better. I mean, at the moment, they're not very good. They don't have much opportunity to screw you. But when they do, then you'll have to watch more for that.
How do you watch an AI system? Like you just mentioned, you're designing institutions that are resilient to this. How do you actually watch an AI who's much more...
Well, you should ask how we do it with humans. One of the ways a boss does it for their subordinate is they try to incentivize the other subordinates to point out such things.
Yeah, and
you create a rivalry among subordinates such that if one of you was trying to, take advantage of you, the other would come to your aid and you could reward them for it.
That's reinforcement learning training. There's reinforcement for the listeners. There's reinforcement learning through human feedback. OpenAI is doing a lot in terms of reinforcement learning through gyms. They have like online environments. There's a great episode with the CEO of Surge AI. I worked for one of the competitors to Surge AI, and it took me by complete surprise that they were just in the background. They never took any VC money, and I suspect from those interviews that they actually found a way to reliably train AIs in this way that you're talking about, which is agent, multi-agent frameworks where you have a mixture of experts models. You combine them, they're adversarial to each other, and then you bring human attention into it, and you build all this technology. But
I mean, look, AIs are new in terms of the latest technology around. They're changing rapidly. There's a big space of possibilities. I don't think I want to be drawing many conclusions from the last few iterations or things. Just let's let people explore the space. But the more general principle is we have had agency relationships for a long time. We've developed many ways to deal with those, and we will presumably, as a first cut, try to apply them to AIs. And if there are differences, then we will try to deal with those differences. But the first thing to do is just do the usual things. And we are doing
just testing, empirical understanding, building intuition.
I mean, at the moment, the AIs they don't own much, they can't control much. So, you have less worry about that. They're just an advisor who, when you buy stock from your stock advisor, they have a financial incentive in the stocks they sell you that you have to worry about that. If they were just independently giving you advice, then you'd less have to worry about that. I mean, I'm sure they will start to have people pay for LLMs to give you the advice they want to. Just like, Google basically lets people pay them to put search items higher in your search rank. I presume LLMs will let people pay them to do that sort of thing too. And at that point, you'll have to be more wary about whether you trust them and whether you can, create ones that don't have that.
I'm not sure if that exact situation happened, but something similar to it, which is that Cloudflare now has 20% of the internet traffic going through Cloudflare. And Google now relies on Cloudflare for a lot of their stuff. And Cloudflare just did a power move against Google, saying that Google has to pay to play, not for their normal search crawlers, but for their AI crawlers. And the sort of worst offender, if we look at it from the old search algorithm days of like a crawler goes out, finds links, and then sponsors out some links, actually links to the product that people are looking for. So that for the Google normal search crawlers is like 1 out of 2, 1 out of 4. These numbers aren't correct. Please fact check me. But Claude, Anthropic, is like only refers out to 1 out of like 90,000 searches. So Cloudflare basically told Google that they now need to pay in order to scrape the internet, and everybody else can pay. They built a marketplace where people can pay to go scrape internet sites. Yep. What do you think?
So when you invited me onto the show on Twitter, it was in the context of a discussion of complexity and simplicity in social institutions. So I would like us not to forget
Let's
that.
Go for it.
You know, the simple idea of democracy is we have candidates and everybody votes and we pick one. You might think that's a really simple system, right? Except now you have to say, well, who's allowed to be the candidate? And we have to have a complicated system for that. And you have to say who's allowed to vote. And then you have to say, well, how often do we vote? But of course, we make it even more complicated than that. We have different jurisdictions that vote within those cities and states and nations. And then even within, say, the nation or a state, there's the executive and there are multiple legislatures. And, then there's voting rules, like where do you vote? How? Who are you allowed to delegate your vote? Right? So and then of course, what we do is we delegate our decision-making ability to government agencies. That is, we elect an agency and then it oversees some area of life, like the police or drug regulation. And now and then those agencies have regulations they implement. And they've got their own special courts that judge those regulations. And as you can see, our actual democracy gets pretty complicated, right? Even if the core idea that you're building on sounds simple. And so, look, anybody who has any alternative to democracy, I think you'll have to admit, even if the core idea sounds simple, when you actually start to implement it, you'll actually have to make a bunch of complicated choices to work out these details. So I don't think, if you say your proposal sounds a lot more complicated than just having a vote, I might say, well, our system today isn't just having a vote. We now have a much more complicated system than just having a vote. And that's going to be required for any realistic system. You're going to have, how elegant and simple the core idea is going to be. You're going to have to fill out a bunch of details.
Well, how do we return to an elegant solution? How do we return to a simple solution, like simplicity?
Well, so for example, we could have a very simple democracy. We could just have, in the United States, there's just one executive and he runs everything, right? And every 4 years we elect a new executive and he's in charge of everything. There's no legislatures, there's no states, there's no cities. That would be simpler. It might not be as good, but it would be simpler. So you have to notice that we have choices. We could make much simpler versions of our current systems.
But because the system is the way it is, it is not a simple. I mean, it might be simple to change it, but extremely complex. Because, like, if we look back at the history of the United States, the United States occurred at a specific time with a specific energy that had a whole
right. But even when they created it, they knew of the simpler option and they rejected
what's simpler? You mean the strong executive?
The one I just described. You just have one executive who runs everything and you elect him every 4 years, right? They knew about that as an option and they rejected it, and plausibly for good reason. And then you might say, look, their public trusted them to develop this more complicated system, even if they couldn't understand the exact reasons why that made more sense. The founding fathers of the U.S. offered a complicated version of democracy. And that's what we implemented. That's what we've been using. And you could say that was good. Because, in fact, it probably was better. The simple, you vote for one candidate every 4 years has the problem that there's no really constraints on them sort of rearranging things in those 4 years to make it hard for you to vote for anybody else in the next election. And then, legislatures have a sort of balance of powers and, correction mechanisms that seem to actually be useful compared to just a single executive. But they are more complicated.
Okay, so, and that's where the elegance comes in, because it needs to be just simple enough and no more simple than that.
There's a trade-off. I mean, it's also true in our legal system. A very simple legal system is, you have a dispute, two parties show up, there's a jury, and the jury decides, and there's no more rules. Okay. And that's kind of the way the legal system was in England 3 centuries ago.
Mm.
There was just mostly juries, and they mostly just made whatever decision they wanted, and the law wasn't very constraining of what decision they would make. That's a very simple legal system. But we have obviously drifted toward a much more complicated legal system where it's so complicated you can't do it by yourself, and you have to hire a lawyer to manage the process. At least today you don't need a lawyer to manage your vote. You can imagine a voting system that got so complicated you had to hire a lawyer to help you vote. But in the legal system, that's where we are. You can't interact with the legal system by yourself. It's too complicated for that.
So, but how does Futarchy solve this?
Well, Futarchy is a very simple core idea, and I try to keep my versions of it as simple as possible. But as I think through some problems, I add some complexities to deal with those. But there's a trade-off of, the complexity there. So the point is, if you didn't trust me, for example, you might think I was adding these complexities as tricky ways to get the answers I wanted out of the system. And so that what you really would want maybe is a set of trials of systems where you see the most successful ones, you copy them. And that's plausible what we did say with the US Constitution. Our system was based on some other, say, Indian democracies at the time, previously. And they had tried different things. And the things that they had tried they thought were successful, we were copying those things. So there should just be an element of cultural evolution where people try different versions. You have some rough sense of which ones seem to be working, and you try to focus on modify variations on the ones that seem most successful. And that's what I expect to do with Futarchy. I'm taking the simplest design and then making variations on it that I think will address problems, but I expect us to try these variations out. And then the ones that are the most successful are the ones that we will.
So what's a recent example of a slight complexification of a problem that you found?
I've got many, but one example is vetoes. So the simplest version of Futarchy would be nothing happens unless the Futarchy markets approve it. But of course, that means a lot of nothing happens because there's way too many decisions for the Futarchy markets to approve. So then, as with, say, the US Constitution, we create an executive who has more discretion. And now the executive has a scope of discretion, and maybe Futarchy decides when to change the executive.
Oh, got it.
But there's a nice intermediate case of there's two extremes. One are decisions. For those decisions, Futarchy has to approve them. If it doesn't, they don't happen. The other extreme is decisions where the executive just gets to make them. And, the only way to fix that is to replace the executive. But there's an intermediate range you can introduce, which is decisions where the executive says he's going to do it, they give notice, and then the Futarchy could veto it if it decides to get its act together and decides it wants to veto it.
Is that going to happen? No, it's not going to happen through proportional representation. It's going to happen through betting.
Right. The betting markets would veto things. So, but basically you see that you can now have a three-stage system because the Futarchy allows vetoes. And but we could do a similar thing with Congress. We could say with the executive, basically president can do things, except if Congress doesn't like it, they can just pass a bill to say, no, you can't do that anymore. We don't like it.
Interesting.
So that's one complication. Another complication is that, say, Futarchy uses an outcome metric, and say for a nation, it might be a complicated outcome metric, or we might see that it approves a decision. We go, that can't be right. We're pretty sure we're going to change the outcome metric so that it doesn't make this decision. But then the decision might go forward. It might be invade Canada or something. And so a way to fix that is to have a veto market that's defined in terms of how future defined welfare. So at the moment, the market, there's always the current defined welfare and then whether it approves a decision. But now there's a separate version of the market in terms of future defined welfare. We don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something. And we can the future defined market could say veto, that's basically saying, we think we're going to fix this. And so we're going to change our welfare definition so that this decision doesn't happen. And the veto markets can basically say that.
Interesting.
I can give you lots more examples, but the point is, these are little, details to work through.
And then you're working through them, implementation. I would love to go back to the companies that are implementing this. How is this different for a company? Because I've been doing a lot of thought for my own company of how to actually implement outcome based. OKRs are one example. but that's not like that's like tied to the, kind of quarterly results and everything like that. But how can this be implemented inside of an organization for gain?
Well, so the first thing, organization has to agree on what outcome metric counts. And then ideally you want an asset that's tracking that outcome metric, a stock price or a coin for a crypto organization. And so once you have an asset that's tracking the outcome you care about, now the main issue is like, what proposals do you allow? Who's allowed to make proposals?
Yeah.
And what range of things they are allowed to make proposals about. And then you have to ask some detailed questions about who's allowed to trade in these markets and, basically, some of those details work out. But the more fundamental thing is just,
what's the goal?
What range of topics do you want the markets to speak to? That is, if you're going to require the market approve every possible decision, that's going to be too many. You'll need some scope of executive discretion. But you'll have to also, decide which things the executive doesn't have full discretion over, such that the Futarchy either gets to veto or needs approval. And then you'll need an organization where there could be a plausible pool of traders who might actually know about these things, and you'll even want to subsidize these markets so that they have an incentive to trade.
What's the difference between internal traders and outsider traders? How big of an organization do you need to do these type of stuff?
Well, if you don't want the world to see your prices and your choices, then you have to limit who can see the prices and therefore who can trade. In which case, but you'll also be limiting, information and liquidity and participation. So you'll get more information if you let anybody participate, but that will be at the cost of letting everybody see your business.
Fascinating. Oh man, there's a lot there. Liquidity and information. And the openness reminds me of open source. I've been recently thinking that we have a AI group here called AI Whisperers, and it's just, I'm offering free events. We've got a Thursday event where we basically teach people about AI or have people come and speak about AI. And then we have a Monday event where I'm actually teaching people how to vibe code. And so that vibe coding now, we're going into all these different things because it's much easier for me being non-technical to build applications now. I've now built a few applications. And so I want to create an open source thing. And this is giving me a lot of insight because I like the idea of I like transparency. I like just having it all out there. And it feels like that is the type of organization that would be very amenable to what you're talking about.
Right. Now, I mean, as you may know, there's this world of DAOs in crypto, and they faced like two big problems. One is often the founders just run away with the money. They've faced some severe agency problems. And they also just face a lack of focus where they just make a DAO and it can just do anything, but it's not actually doing anything at all. And so it's really hard to so I really think organizations to function need to have a focus. And then those people involved with them gain expertise in that focus area. And then it focuses on those areas where it knows better. And that's also going to be true even with Futarchy. Some people have tried to create just a generic investment DAO or something that's open to all possible investments. But now it's hard for the people involved with it to get very specialized. It would make sense for them to invest in a particular area and then to be good at that.
Central problem of my life is I'm open-minded. I go through a lot of things. I think about a lot of different things, but then how do I actually stay focused enough? And how do you constrain? How do you put constraints on things to make it? Because if your view is too big, you can't get much done. And if your view is too focused, then you can't see all the potential opportunities.
Right.
In organizations. How this applies to organizations. And I agree that the DAOs can often be sort of just like this amorphous, way too nebulous and amorphous. And then you have companies that do one specific thing. I do think AI is going to start to change the potential for how much we need to focus compared to in the past. I think there will be more opportunity to do wide open.
Right.
Go for it.
But so there's just this tendency to follow the news, which I think is overdone. It's interesting to ask why, but basically there's the strong tendency for people to just be attracted by the latest news, the latest issues everybody's talking about, and then to think and talk about those. And that detracts from just thinking about fundamentals. So there's just a lot about the nature of humanity and human interactions and organizations that we don't understand that well, and we're slowly understanding better. But it doesn't have much to do with the latest news. And, if you want, honestly, forever, there's just been this tendency to talk about the news. Just most people in their free time like to talk about whatever the latest thing is everybody's talking about. But clearly, most people who are productive and useful in the world, it's because they aren't focused on the news. They're focused on some more specific things that they're good at. Well, and, even intellectuals, we read the ancient books and, focus on deep issues and not focused on what happened in the last year or two and how has that changed stuff. But, so I have this book, say, on the elephant in the brain, just about how we think about human motivations. And I also have a book in the future called The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth. And then people just often want to talk about, and what's changed about these things the last 2 years. And I go, these aren't about stuff that's changed the last few years. These are about just pretty constant basic features of the world and trying to understand those better. So Futarchy is about just, is there a better way to do governance? And yes, stuff is changing in the last few years, but it's not about the last few years' changes. But often people aren't interested in a proposal for change unless somehow you can connect it to the more recent other changes. Because they have this idea, well, something's been around for a while and it hasn't been adopted. It's never going to be adopted, so why should I think about it? But if something has suddenly become feasible because of the last few years of changes, well, maybe now I should consider it. But there's just a lot of stuff that's always been feasible that should still be done.
Yeah.
It's just we haven't gotten around to figuring out that we should do it.
Yeah, it's the nature of timelessness versus novelty. And a big critique of, I would say, science and particularly scientism recently is, and academia to a certain extent, is there's this in-depth focus on novelty and like the new things. Do you agree? Do you think that that's what academia is kind of doing, that it is stuck in this sort of novelty, or do you think it's more of a societal thing?
So I was talking about more just the larger public intellectual news focus. Like there's a standard rule of thumb in public policy that there's no point in issuing a white paper on a topic that hasn't been in the news in the last 2 weeks. Nobody will read your white paper because everybody only wants to read white papers about what's in the news.
And our whole
academia focuses on novelty and research, but it's not about stuff that's been in the news. So it's a different concept of novelty.
I like that.
And I'm more just focused on academia, just has this focus to get inbred and, advanced literatures and leaves blanks in between. So there's this vast space of things academia is supposed to be looking at. And it tends to form these clumps of people citing each other all next to a set of related papers. And then there's spaces between the clumps that are nearly as important, but just nobody works there because you want to be near the clumps.
Yep.
So I would just complain academia just neglects topics over long periods of time because they're not in the clumps.
Brilliant point. So we'll take another 5 minutes or so. So that's a great distinction, that there are multiple forms of novelties, and the public policy thing is really interesting. I mean, why? Like, it feels related to Futarchy because we're going to talk. Like, Futarchy is about the future, bringing an idea of the future into the present and trying to anchor to it so that we can do better governance. How is that connected to this idea that, like, why are we so focused on the news? It's the way all our social media works as well. It's just like so.
It's the way conversation works. So we have a chapter in conversation in the book, The Elephant in the Brain, I just showed you. Basically, in conversation, you might think we would want to talk about the most important issues to us, and that we might therefore be eager to listen and reluctant to speak because we're trying to collect information. But instead, we have this norm that we just talk about random stuff, and the topic just drifts. And our norm is we're supposed to find something to say about whatever the current thing we're talking about is, even if it's not very important. and you're supposed to show off through how you are able to find relevant things to whatever random topic shows up. So that's in our personal conversations. And so the news standard looks pretty similar to that. It's just more about our collective conversation. So it's just our conversational standard. But see, the key point here is Futarchy would break that. That is, I really seriously mean the following. Our world is vastly structured by the fact that we have crappy governance systems. As an expert, when I've learned about particular areas of policies, I can see it's not that hard to figure out something close to the best policy that's nothing like the actual policy. And repeatedly, you can find that out if you ask, why isn't the actual policy being implemented? You come to governance problems. We just have problems with our governance systems. Repeatedly, over and over again, in companies, in government, in everywhere. And most of the problems you can think about with the world today are implicitly problems with our governance systems not being able to fix those problems. The reason you can identify a problem, and it continues decade after decade, is that our governance systems aren't up to the task of fixing them. And I and my colleagues here are relatively libertarian in that we tend to think that people over-rely on government today because it's not up to the task that they tend to give it. But that's all conditional on the fact that our current governance systems are crappy. But if we could have a competent form of governance, a system of governance that would actually effectively achieve the goals you gave it to it, that changes everything. It means libertarians like myself should be much less skeptical about using government to fix things if it's much more competent. It means that lots of big problems would just get fixed, and that we would reorient our public conversations to more be supporting whatever process is actually fixing them, rather than just our conversations today that don't seem to go anywhere and don't seem very useful. So the world would change radically if only we had a competent form of governance. And the claim is Futarchy is plausibly such a competent form of governance. You give it a goal and then it actually achieves it. Effectively. It actually searches in the space of things to do, actually looks realistically at the cause and effect relationships between what you do and what happens. It's not politically correct. It's not, buried under woke, wishful thinking. It is realistic and effective at actually doing stuff. And if we had such a system, the world would radically change for the better. I have many, problems that I focused on over my life where it just, but how do you get anybody to listen? How do you get anybody to do anything given how broken our governance is? Now that's true at the level of even getting people to consider Futarchy. The meta problem is hard because we are in a broken world of governance. But if you could push through the difficult, bad governance we have now to get it to try out and then adopt a better form of governance, suddenly there's one ring to rule them all. If you recall from the Lord of the Rings metaphor, you just have this one crazy fix that fixes everything.
It reminds me now that you accurately tied it to just like governance is bad and everybody's now used to that. It's not like the 1950s or the 1960s and a little bit to the 1970s where government felt enlightened.
But that was a mistaken impression.
It wasn't.
It
wait,
wasn't,
why
but
not?
People were willing to believe it. I mean, just a lot of governance things the government did in the 50s and 60s didn't work well at all.
Yeah.
But look, if you look in the larger context, say 3 centuries ago, the world hardly had any decent governance.
Yeah.
That is, the main reason why the world is rich today is not so much technology. It's because we've generated large organizations that are more competent than before. 3 centuries ago, there were almost no large organizations.
Really good point.
The militaries were about the only large organizations. They were very simply structured, and everything else, pretty much all business and everything else was very simple organizations. That's the world up until 3 centuries ago. And in the last 3 centuries, we've learned how to manage larger organizations. That means we've learned a lot about governance of large organizations. But there's still a lot we don't know. I mean, the amazing thing is you go into a large company today and you look at the details and you go, wow, this is a mess. How does this even function? But it's doing better than all the other companies
before.
It's, the world-class organizations today, still when you look at the details, they seem like, what a mess.
Man.
And yet that's our best.
We're not going to have time to go into it, but I want to talk about the administrative state And like, because now we have a state that sort of transcends the executive, transcends all the functions of government, has a lot to do with FDR and kind of the expansion of the welfare state. And there's just like, it's really, because what I'm getting from you is that it's all about standards. It's all about the standard of analysis, that you're saying that there is a better standard that we can have. And just because we haven't had a lot of like great government, it just didn't exist. There was no option for it. It was just anarchy. If we take a really high standard, we can essentially move towards that high standard. That's where the futarchy comes in, and that's where actually making bets on the high standard. I really like that. If you have anything else to share, yeah, go for it.
So in business, we pioneered large organizations, and then government has adopted many of the business practices of large organizations inside government. So government agencies have also gotten better, but they're just on average worse than our private organizations, because in private organizations, you have stronger incentives to make the right trade-offs between formality and intuition and just getting stuff done. Whereas in government, you tend to just focus on accumulating some interpretation of the rules and making a set of procedures and then just following them to your death, regardless of how effective they are. An example, at the beginning of World War II, U.S. was losing. And we were losing for most of the first year. And then the U.S. head of the military and the president basically said, we need to make some big changes here. And they just tried to make some big changes to make this thing work better. And they succeeded. But previously, they'd just been going on the bureaucratic inertia of the system and its structure, and it had been failing. But today, without that threat of losing in a war, even in the pandemic, we're not willing to make very many big changes. Nobody got fired for failing in the pandemic. A dramatic example is, there's these GPS satellites up there. They were put up, they had a certain accuracy, and then they decided to put up a new generation of GPS satellites with much better accuracy. But between the two generations of satellites, they had acquired this rule that all network communication within the Defense Department had to go through their new network protocol. And that meant all communication between ground systems and the GPS satellites had to go through the new protocol that they developed. And they spent billions of dollars trying to make that work, and they failed. And in the end, we still have the same old protocol with the old resolution, even though the satellites are capable of much higher resolution. But we all get GPS signals at the old low resolution because we developed this rule and we didn't know how to flexibly actually make an exception to it. And so we did not actually, make a new communication protocol that you can interact with the satellites at the higher resolution. We, in fact, just left the old protocol the same because we couldn't find a way to do the new one with the new Department of Defense network language standards.
Brilliant.
And that's the sort of thing that happens over and over again, you see, with government. It just ossifies around a set of procedures and rules, and then it just can't change when it needs to. With companies, either the company finds a way to change or it dies, and we have an evolution that keeps them roughly in a decent balance of flexibility and, needing some structure and predictability. But the government doesn't do that. And plausibly, our systems are rotting. So there's this idea in software of software rot. And I think plausibly our legal and regulatory systems are suffering that same sort of rot that's old software systems suffer. Old software systems slowly get harder to change because they get more interdependencies, because modifications tend to reduce modularity. And that plausibly is why our legal system is so much more awkward
and that's not new. That's pretty old. Like, the whole idea that the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, also kind of like morphed into this large administrative state. The main thing that's changed is the scale of what we're talking about.
And the fact we have all this technical progress that can, counter that. And that it's happening now on more of a global scale. We have a lot of global convergence of regulation around the globe. So there's a sense in which our entire global civilization is now more of a monoculture, which does regulation pretty much the same everywhere. So we could all be slowly declining in the quality of our regulation, but we still keep developing new technology that makes other things more efficient.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can our listeners find out more about you and Futarchy?
Well, I'm just one of those lucky people who, if you Google my name, I'm the first guy who shows up. So Robin Hanson, you'll find me all sorts of variations.